Ew! Smells like it's time for another Shy Life podcast.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. Good luck, studio.
Oh, it's the Shy Life podcast.
Oh, there's going to be some drama ahead.
All I wanted was a pie, and then I hatched out of an egg.
Okay, bring the mic over. He's ready to record.
Hello.
It's the quiet ones you've got to watch, you know.
Is it metaphorical? Is it deep? Is it deep?
Boy, he's not all that shy, is right.
Blimey, Governor, it's the Shy Life podcast.
Excellent.
649. Bonjour et bienvenue au podcast The Shy Life.
Hello and welcome to yet another episode of the Shy Life podcast with me, Paul the Shy Yeti. How are you doing? I'm all right. So what's going on in this episode? Well, we're going to be a bit random, which is most episodes, but no, we've got two guests. We've got Mr. Nick Goodman's here.
Hello.
And Mr. Toppy Smelly's here.
These biscuits are really good. Do you have any more jam?
Yes, just have it yourself.
Another jamming session.
Yeah. So we're going to do some random questions, but, we're going to do something else as well. But let's run the theme music. When we come back, we'll tell you a little bit more. Run that theme music.
Darling, it's the Shy Life podcast.
Yes, well, it's a positive theme point for highlights, the Shy Life.
You won't find a cast of characters like this everywhere.
I'll go anyway for a potato.
Delicious.
Hello, campers. How are you? You quite like a big fan, don't you, Paul?
Go Shy Yeti.
Oh, he hasn't found out my secret. Yes, he has.
I love the Yeti test. It's my favorite thing.
If you thought that was bad, just listen to this.
Yeah, I'm strangely drawn to Yeti Uncle John's ankles as well.
I could eat my body weight in crisps every day.
Has everyone seen my hot sausage?
It's all gooey and meaty and yum, 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 yum.
Oh, I can't wait for it to begin.
It's the Shy Life podcast.
I like that, yeah.
Marvellous, Paul.
Hi there.
Toppy, there's a load more jam in that cupboard over there. If you run out of that jam.
Thank you. This is the best green room ever. I mean, I know I'm not in the green room anymore, but now I'm here in front of the mic. But anyways, lots of good food in there. Thank you.
Is there anything else I can get for you, sir? Anything? Coffee?
Yeah, coffee, that'd be great. And just
Mr. Goodman?
No, I'm fine as I am. Thank
Yeah,
you.
right.
splash a little whiskey in it.
Yeah, I'll do that. Right, I'll let you get on with it. Oh, sorry, listeners, I didn't realise you were here. Well, thanks, Yeti Uncle John. So, yes, listeners, we're going to do some random word sort of chats, see what stories we might come up with. We might do some of those, would you rather do this or rather do that? But also, Toppy, I believe you've been to a science fiction convention recently, so I think we're probably going to talk about our experiences, both yours and Nick and I, who we went to a lot of conventions back in the day, but we'll return to that in a bit. So, Toppy, you probably heard the episodes where Nick and I have done random word discussions, like we have three words, and you can, if you think of an anecdote which relates to any of them, you kind of spill your heart out.
Okay.
So I've got the first one up, and you can decide which of these you can talk about. If it triggers any memory, if not, then that's fine. But the three words I've got are relationship, steam, or indulge. So is there anything that any of those words triggers off for you? Who would like to go first?
Do you want to go first, Tom?
Yeah, I'll go first. This is wouldn't think of this, but quite honestly, steam immediately brought to mind a humidifier And I grew up with a humidifier in my room constantly because as a kid, all the way up to high school, I had what we call here the croup. I don't know what you guys call it, but
we certainly, when I was a kid, I got croup.
Okay, so you do have that word. Yeah, it's this horrible breathing obstruction. I don't even understand it now. It's got nothing to do with asthma or anything, but it's something where I don't know what happens, to be honest. I don't know if it's a virus or a germ or whatever, but I would get it all the time, and it would severely restrict your breathing. And it was really frightening on the earliest occasions, and then over the years, I completely understood it, and it didn't frighten me anymore. I would just go into my mother's room and say, "Mom, I've got the croup," and she would, in her sleep, go over and set the humidifier up, which I guess is what people did. Anyways, steam, humidity, the croup. There you go.
I must admit, I don't think I've heard the word for years, but I do remember it with childhood ailments. But certainly, yeah, with croup, definitely, yes. I am familiar with that.
Yeah, I mean, and here's the thing. It would come on at night and then disappear during the day. And then the next night it would be back. I have no freaking clue what it was, but it's definitely a childhood thing because by high school, I remember having the last few times I ever had it. Never had it as an adult. So,
what about you, Nick? Which of those words?
I mean, definitely drawn to relationship. I basically, when I left, I went to an all-boys school. I left in '85, and there were two things I wanted to do when I. Apart from getting a job, is to write and more urgently to get a girlfriend. And I left. School does not prepare you for relationships. It's woefully inadequately, and I suspect it probably still is. I left school not, you divorce from the opposite sex, or sort of. Or any kind of connection for the last 5 years on pain of getting the cane. But so I went into my first job, and there was a girl called Kim who was quite good looking, and I trotted around doing jobs for her all day long, and only discovered she had a husband and kids, and I was sort of in a fun call evening about this, and I thought, well, hadn't it occurred to you, kind of, I was so naive, and I just, I didn't get a girlfriend until 1990, and it just didn't happen, and I was quite sort of yearning for one for years, and I was engaged at 25 nearly 25 because I thought. I've got to get married, I'm nearly 25, which seems ludicrous now. But it wasn't really later but I valued all the relationships I had. And I still look back on them fondly, probably more fondly than I really should, even though I've been married for nearly 20 years. And even now, I think wistfully about them. So relationships have always been important to me. And even in the sort of, when I was a kid, I liked the idea of having a girlfriend. A friend of ours, Richard Morley, he did one of Paul's films, one of mine. And in fact, he had two of Paul's things because I directed him one. But I brought him up for a film once, and he actually, before, we had to read through in a pub. And before I'd known him a little bit, and he said, before we started, he said, "My sister tells me that you were her first boyfriend." And sure enough, this would have been summer of '76, which would have been before he was born. There was a little girl called Kerry who lived across the road, and the road was sort of the big no-no because there was a big dual well, it was a main road, but it was quite a busy main road, and we were not allowed to cross it as kids. So I was allowed to, I was escorted over, and I spent time with this little girl over the road who I would talk to. But I didn't realise until 1998 that I'd gone down in history as a boyfriend. I'm quite proud of that. So, yes, all sorts of relationships, and I won't go into any sort of detail, but it's relationships are always something that I've treasured.
That's nice. I got a quick follow-up, because you said you think wistfully of older relationships or relationships gone by. But does that include, like, for example, just a relationship that ended very bitterly, very badly? Are you able to think wistfully?
Yes, you think of the good time. There was certainly one relationship that did end nastily, but I mean, there's one. I mean, there are ones. There's one that I'm still very close friends with. One that I'm pretty good friends with. One is dead, and the other one doesn't really bother with me at all, even as a friend. And it's the one that doesn't really bother with me at all that I did probably the most, quite a lot of creative stuff with, which hurts even more. But yeah, there are, and they crop up in dream. You probably wouldn't want to go out with them now, but they were part of your life. And also all these people that say all these jokes and cheapskates at one's ex. I never quite got that, because these are all people, unless they get violent, then the whole, thank God I've never had that. And that really turns it on its head a bit and gets it and spoils it. But something, or any kind of abuse come to that. But when it's at the end of the day, they're people you've loved. And, even if you've kind of fallen out of love with them in that way, they are they have been a very shiny part of your life.
I find it quite difficult to remember the bad times. I only remember the good times, or I remember the things that were so good about it, and it's a shame that that changed. Although that person doesn't exist in the way they used to, they're completely. It's like they might as well be a different person.
I mean, I'm very pleased that I think all bar one of my sort of proper relationships is kind of got a preservation. I was going to say preservation order, preservation of some kind on the Sutton Park episodes, because I think. That my first girlfriend was just a bit after, but she features as a friend in Sutton Park throughout. My first appearances was my then second girlfriend, then fiance. There is a certain part of Jill, the one that died on Sutton Park, when like a behind the scenes thing that Paul filmed surreptitiously, and the storyline with the one before Ali. But there were other relationships which were like almost flirtations, where we never actually became an item, but we loved each other like an item. And it's I mean, you never forget the love and the good times, and even music and things like that. Or even ones that you would have liked to have gone out with and never did. There's a certain magic about it that. It's never quite left me, even though, as I say, I'm quite happily married. But one should never forget the love.
It actually worked out quite well, because Toppie did Steam and Nick did Relationship, and actually I'm going to do Indulge. That's not to, we don't have to do it like that. But Indulge makes me think. Well, it's two things. Partly it makes me think of those massive, wonderful, exciting buffets in Vegas, those big food halls with all the macarons. You'd start sort of filling your plate up, and then you'd sort of look around and realise you'd only just done like about a quarter of it, and the plate was like, oh well, I'm gonna. If I could eat all that's on that plate, I'm going to have to go back and try something in the next quarter.
Those chilies that we discovered on that hall, his mouth was on fire for a whole afternoon. We were drinking so much orangeade.
but the one time I can think of that I did overindulge was because when I was at university in Birmingham, I lived in a particular house, and then when I finished university, I went away and applied for jobs, and then got a job back in Birmingham again. And rather, it was a bit of a sort of, well, it's nice to be back up there because I was still doing Sutton Park. It was nice from that point of view to know I better have another 6 months of filming in that location. Mm-hmm. But I didn't have lots of friends at university. I had one or two, and then it went down just to one because people dropped off courses. And I got on fine with people on my course, but a lot of them were Birmingham people. They just went home to their own. They weren't necessarily looking. They weren't necessarily there to make friends, and I was never in sort of halls of residence. So when I came to do this 6-month job, I did approach my old landlord to see if my room was still available. I thought, well, I'm not going to have the people there necessarily, but it would be nice to be in a familiar circumstance or surroundings. And sure enough, my room was free, so I went back there for 6 months, and it was a longer commute than a couple of buses, but I just listened to the morning radio. It's about the only time in my life I've ever listened to morning radio on the bus. But that 6 months went quite quickly. But before I left, my dad was going to pick me up. I thought I must go and have, because I like curries, but in Birmingham they're also known for balties, which are a kind of curry, but you tend not to eat them with rice. You tend to eat them with naan bread, and so I thought, I'll treat myself. And I was still sort of packing up my room, and it wasn't a big room, but I had packing to do before my dad picked me up, and I was on the 3rd floor or something. So it was sort of, you wanted to pack as quick so you could get everything back down to the car relatively quickly. So you wanted to pack quite tightly. Although I was younger then, I could do those stairs, but I definitely overindulged. I ordered far too much and ate it. And then I don't know if I was drinking wine as well, but I really sort of bloated up and to the point I could barely move. And it was very delicious, but I had to kind of just say to myself, I think the only thing I can do is go to bed and wake up early in the morning to finish the packing. I can't get the rest of this packing done tonight because I just need to just not turn the light off and lie in a dark room. I still
been there.
I still remember that, and that was 1996. So yeah, I'm sure there have been plenty of other times I've overindulged, but that one sticks in my mind.
Well, my friend Mannion and I, over the last couple of years, have repeatedly go to what we call the place that we dare not mention by name. And as soon as we say that, we both know we're talking about the Chinese buffet, which is open for lunch and dinner. And it's kind of a bargain. It's not expensive, and you can eat all you want. And there's a lot of selections, although I have to say, I'm not sure how many authentically Chinese recipes are in there.
We'll be Chinese tonight.
Yeah. We were in a different city far away, and we found a Chinese buffet, and we said, oh, our favorite thing. We went in, it was exactly the same. The same food prepared exactly the same way. So obviously, there's a company behind, that provides these foods to any buffet Chinese restaurant that wants them. Anyways, you don't go to that place and come out slightly still hungry. You go there and you eat. And of course, we're always stuffed, and we always say, "Oh, I should have stopped 10 minutes ago."
Right, shall we try? I might give us 5 words this time, so we've got a bit more. Although that worked out very nicely. We all did a different one. Right. Okay. Sometimes I think, shall I roll the dice again? The words aren't always.
Well, never know.
Well, let's see. We got remind, detector, consolidate, photograph, or offend.
Ooh.
That inspire us. If not, then we're allowed to roll again. But is there anything in there that inspires you?
Well, I had something grab me. How about you, Nick?
I mean, Photo, I think, probably is the most obvious one there. I think photo probably.
Let's try for it then. Keep our extra role for another.
Photo. Thing is, as you know, I've become a bit of a treasure hunter in my old age, of memories and things and people's. And as Paul knows, I seek out and root out old tapes and digitalize them and print so we can use them again. But photos is something also I'm also interested in. I began photography, I suppose, in about 1979. I have a picture which I took on my mum's old. It's a very famous type of camera, so famous I've forgotten it. The slide. She used to take slides, and I said to her once in the summer of '79, "Well, can I take one?" And I took a photograph of my mother, which I think is on Facebook now. And about the following year. Anyway, any kind of old photograph excites me. And I like to preserve them for people as well, because I keep everything scanned and on a hard drive and put as many as I can on Facebook, old ones, ones from the family, ones, and I encourage other people to do that. And I particularly, I think was it last year, a couple of years ago, a friend of mine who I've known for over 50 years, he was in a playgroup with me. And he said, I've got, I posted up some photographs, some slides that my mum did of my last years of playgroup 50 years ago today. And not today, what am I talking about? 50 years ago this year. And my friend Kevin, who I knew from that time, said, "Oh, I've got some." I said, "Is that you in the Ring of Roses?" And he said, "No, it isn't, but my mum's got a picture." I thought, could you ask your mum to dig it out? And of course, when he did, I'm there in the toffee-coloured stripy T-shirt, the kind of thing I hung around with, and you think, oh yeah, kind of thing. And there I was in the summer of '73 with some very basic hairdos on everybody, and everybody looking very 70s, and kids out in sort of kind of stripped to the waist at some point. And you would not get that these days. Everybody was protected from the sun and everything. What's interesting, I mean, this is going off at a tangent a little bit, but the clues you can see in photographs of the time, and certain things in the background and details, and because there's some more next to where I went to playgroup, the preschool, it was St Edmund's Church, which in 1972 was deconsecrated, and it's now the Arts Centre. And in the back of the photograph with me and my friend Georgina, there's all these pews, these church pews. And I did wonder whether they might have been ripped out of the church when it was deconsecrated. So it's just little questions that you kind of get you thinking when you're looking at an old photograph. But I'm always excited. And there's one with Paul's friend Harry, who I knew from birth onwards. There's a picture of him, his local enemy, and myself at the age of it was almost dodgy, the fact, because I was like 9 at the time, nearly 10, and there I was with this paddling pool with these youngsters. It would look a bit dodgy these days. And Harry's dad found this photograph of us, and that was a lovely summer. And I treasure that photograph because it's sort of one that we hadn't got in our collection. So every little. The whole photos present, especially old ones, and new ones I treasure as well, especially if you photograph people that you only just met or just of old friends, and I'm always troubling people for a photograph, and sometimes they need persuading, and sometimes they don't need persuading, but they shouldn't need persuading, but they had to be persuaded anyway. One time last year, I had my sister and my brother-in-law staying. And I said to well, can I have a photograph? And she goes, why? And I go, because you're my sister. You shouldn't have to ask why, And So yeah, photos have a certain amount. I've always been vaguely interested in photography. I've never got very technical, and I've never been particularly brilliant at it. But I do love a good photograph. I must. And that's
What about you, Toby? Which of those words inspired you?
Oh, I'll just say something about photographs first. It's it's something that's really changed here in America because it's all digital now, and it all exists on your phone. And some people back it up and preserve it, and some people, I dare say they probably haven't looked at any of their photos they took 4 or 5 years ago, and nor has anyone else. And my family had shelves of huge photograph albums where once upon a time you had to develop the picture, and you'd get it on a piece of photographic paper, and you would put it in a photo album. And every once in a while, someone would look through the photo album and they would see these. Well, now people share it on social media, and the way social media works is, sure, you see it that one day, but you'll never see that photo again. Unless you have something like Facebook has a reminder, like they bring, and but anyways, it's just not the same because they're not in a book somewhere. My niece does something every year, and I think more people should do this and think about it more. Though these photos that you have on your camera, you can go to a place and not for a lot of money, you can create like this book of photos from that year. And of course, that doesn't mean every single photo you've taken is worth putting in there, but you select them and then you can print them out fairly cheaply and give them to people.
It's a nice idea. We did that with my great niece. We came to visit my church, and we did a photograph session with her, looking around it, and we turned all those photographs into a book and gave them to my mum. So it's quite nice. But it's the same over here. Everything's gone digital. I myself, we switched over to pretty well mostly digital in about 2005 or 6. But I always make sure that we have it backed onto the hard drive. I make a point of, all that photograph you took, Ali, the last lot of photographs that you took on your phone, we transfer them to me, and I'm very conscientious about keeping all the photographs we've taken on our hard drive and making sure that it's there in the correctly the right month, the right year, and I'm a bit pedantic like that. So you have to keep a tabs on preserving them. I certainly would say please back them up, peoples, because you never know, and don't lose anything.
And just what you said is a lot. What's happening now is, okay, I've got photos of ancestors that go back to the dawn of photography, when you had a daguerreotype, which is basically an image on glass. Okay, we have those. They've been handed down, and usually on the back is at least a name. Okay, at least a name. Well, there are tons of photographs being taken today where there are no names recorded, and people are going to look at them in the future and go, "Who's this? I don't know. It means nothing to me."
Very, very important point, because now I've got, I try and put as many names on those photographs as at all possible, because of exactly what you said. If you don't watch it, it's like the photographs I inherited from my parents, going with ancestors going back to photography going back to the Victorian days, with a lot of our ancestors, and there are old photographs, and even the oldest have still got. They not only tell you who the people are, but it tells you how they died. There was these two little girls, and I mean, infant mortality was as high in those days. And it actually, I think it's from my mum's side of the family. It said this person had this girl had scarlet fever and kissed this girl, and she died 3 days later. Real tragic sort of stories. But there they are. Somebody's taken the effort to put that on the back.
The weird thing is, and I don't know what happens to the photos after, whether they are being kept somewhere, but my niece's generation seem to have a very weird relationship with, say, things like Instagram. So my niece, she'll put photos up over the year, and then at the start of the next year, she'll wipe it clean and start afresh.
Oh no!
That's just bizarre, because to me, Instagram is, or anything like, even the Facebook photos, it's a history of my last 10 years or whatever. It's you want to see I mean, I know she's at the age where her looks are changing. She's going from a child to a young woman. She's changing what she looks like, but that's the fun of it. I mean, if anything, you know, those of us who are a bit older, we probably haven't changed that much in the last 20 years. We might have aged a bit, but we haven't got. Some of my younger friends who were perhaps teenagers in the noughties, you can see how they've gone from being scrappy little kids to being like mid-30s, whereas 20 years ago we just looked younger. We weren't necessarily having crazy haircuts or outlandish fashions. Whereas when you do when you're a teenager, my niece likes things like RuPaul's Drag Race. She likes that sort of makeup type stuff, and she'll make herself up in that sort of makeup which the drag queens are using, and she likes all of that. So it's a shame that it's not there anymore when you look at it. I don't know whether she's kept them somewhere else on a drive.
Mm-hmm.
I hope so.
My friend Maria says that she's got hardly any pictures of her childhood, you know, because they moved from place to place and things got lost and everything. I find that desperately sad. I'm lucky in that my parents not only took photographs, but until about 1981, they took good photographs. They took them on slide. So we've got sort of a lot of our childhood in fairly good quality. A selfish part of me would like to say I wish they'd extended that to Cinefilm, because I'd love to have had a Cinefilm of some of the, from my childhood. But you can't win them all. But, you know, that's what. So I'm really, really lucky to have that, because some people just don't have that. What's interesting is when I came, because of course when I got all of Mum's photographs, I didn't keep them all, but I scanned them all in, every single one. And from the 80s onwards, both Mum and I started using rather cheapo cameras. So the picture quality on those 80s ones aren't so good, which I kicked myself over in my sort of latter teenage years, which were a very important part of my life. I wish I'd done better quality photographs. But no, you've got to work to actually preserve them these days.
One of the things I used to have to do when I was at the college was that I don't know, it was coming up to the anniversary of the college at one point, and somebody said, "Oh, what do you have in your archives of photos of history of the college?" Well, in the time that my boss and I had been there, nobody had ever asked that, and you know, you can't expect somebody in 2005 to be responsible for whether photos from the 1960s were kept or not, if they never had been. And so I said, well, I'll go and have a look and see if we have anything. Well, so I started putting together a sort of list of what we did have, and you know, considering it was the sort of college it was, there were royal visits and things like that. So what I did discover, and through talking to various people, it would appear that at some stage these photos, the earliest photos, had ended up in our archives. But we also put a call out around the college to say, does anybody else have like photos for more recently, which, you know, we're trying to keep them all in one place. And you'd often have people coming in and kind of having no interest in the history. They're just coming in doing a job for a couple of years. They're very, very senior. They might have been the secretary of the college. They might have been the chief of staff. They'd be like, "Oh, what's this in my drawer? Or what's this on my shelf? Oh, just bin that." And what had happened as well, I think in the mid 90s, they'd refurbished the college and moved the whole college for a couple of years or a year or something to another building. And a lot of photos that had happened to have been in a particular office from the 80s. Weirdly, we had quite a lot of photos from the 60s and 70s, but the 80s was badly represented because for some reason somebody had been very clingy and held on to the photos, and when they'd done the refurbishment, it all gone in a skip and was gone forever. And we'd have to say, this is the responsibility of everybody. You can't blame the library for not having those photos if they were never given them. We weren't even working here in the 80s, so it's very frustrating trying to keep an archive of photos when not everybody's got the same or doesn't have the same level of importance on those things being kept.
There's two other things I can think of actually to say about photos. One is I do have a small but significant fantasy hit list of photographs I'd like to track down. One of which is there's a school photograph. Well, there's a photograph that was taken in summer of '81 when I was finishing my last year at Highbury. Our teacher was retiring, so he took a photograph of us all as his last boys. And I don't know whether that will ever pitch up somewhere, but I mean, he must be dead by now, bless him, or he's totally ancient. But the other thing is, one of my first studio theatre, our local Amdrams, I did a play my first play that I played a part in was The Heiress, Henry James's Washington Square, the stage adaptation of it. And I played a character in that. And there was a lovely black and white photograph taken of myself and a girl called Emma, who was playing my wife. And I thought, I really want a copy of that because it was my first show. And I ordered the copy from the lady who kind of got them all printed in 1990. I'm still waiting for it. So I imagine it's not going to come. But I'm working on a book with somebody involved with studio theatre. And I say, if you lay your hands on this photograph, I would love a copy because it is historical because it was my first show. And it's a full professional photograph. I'd love to see it. The other thing is, funny how photographs come your way, because my mum went to Marbella in 1978 with the work, and all her photographs came horribly overexposed. I don't know if the sun got it into it. All her time in Marbella was bleached. It really was. However, there was another set of photographs that somebody took that came out beautifully. Somehow my mum was given them because the guy got sacked, and these photographs were in his drawer, and mum, I don't know why she took them home, but they were all a heck of a lot better than hers. And in actual fact, when I did a sesh with digitalizing the slides. I didn't keep them, but I digitalized all these ones that were taken by this sacked bloke. And looking at the scantily clad women he was hanging out with, I imagine it isn't too difficult to work out why he was sacked. But it was a wonderful little random thing, and I thought they're a lot better than Mum's photographs, I must admit. But yeah, it's amazing how random photographs can come your way.
Toppy, I must apologise because we were going to do your word, but if it's not photograph, can I do my word next? Because I was going to do photograph, and talking because Nick says about photos coming your way. I happen to have some photos that have come my way. When I arrived, reading glasses. I'm unfortunately Toby not being in the room, he won't be able to see them. But Nick's here, so I'll pass them over. Now, the envelope says only 50 years ago, and that's not quite right because it's photos from my christening. And I'm not quite 50 yet, so I wouldn't have been christened until the summer, say, of 74. So it's not quite 50 years ago. But
would you like me to scan them back at base?
Yeah, yes, you could do. I can give them over to you. I took a couple of shots with a couple of because my mum said, well, these are just copies that they gave to him. The guy who gave them, it was my godfather, and I had a godfather and a godmother, and my godmother is now in a home because she's unwell, but her husband, my godfather, was going through these photos as he was clearing out the flat. I think he's downsizing and sent these back to my parents, but they are photos, probably there were copies that we have, although I did point out to my mum there were a couple of what do you call those ones? Polaroids.
That's a beautiful Polaroid.
They won't come, that must be they won't be duplicates of those because you couldn't get duplicates of Polaroids. The two Polaroids are a lot later than the christening ones. That there's one by a boat. My mum and dad and my godmother by a boat because they used to own a boat. That must be. I look quite small in that one, so that's probably sort of mid-70s. There's one with me and my panda.
Oh, panda! You mentioned the panda on another episode, didn't you?
Yeah, and I must be about 5 or 6 in that one. Actually, I think the jumper I'm wearing, might have ended up on one of my cuddly toys. I was very into cuddly toys.
It's like my chair's falling to bits.
Oh, a jumper. I love it.
So I'm just trying to repair Nick's chair.
I've done a Goldilocks, I'm afraid.
Uh-oh.
Might be all right.
I think all right. Yeah. I just have to sit very still, which is something I'm not very good at.
But I'm not sure if it was his christening as well, but the christening photos, my cousin is there, and he's a bit younger than me. I don't know if he was being christened. I don't know if they decided to get us both christened at the same time, or whether he's just there because my uncle and aunt are there. But there's a picture of me and my mum and Auntie Jessie, who Nick met many years ago.
And you're eating what appears to be a sort of insole of a.
I'm chewing something.
Do let me scan these. No,
yeah. The colour has sort of washed out of them a bit, hasn't it?
It's not too bad though. After all this time,
it's very very
70s.
Auntie's wearing very 70s.
This is the auntie that said, "Oh, I hope he hadn't found out my secret." Yeah. Do you think he has?
Yeah. So she's. There's my grand's holding me. I'm the one.
They're in beautiful condition.
And there's me with a dog. One of those dogs that was you use like a draft excluder. I'm
sausage. Oh, we got one of those.
Sausage dog thing.
You can almost imagine you doing something part with that little fella.
Probably, yeah. There's a picture of me and my mum.
Actually, I think he's still around, isn't he?
It might be a version of him.
That's such a lovely picture of your mum.
Yeah.
It looks like you're holding a fish. If you look at the distance, it looks like you're holding a fish.
Picture of my dad. I'm on the.
Your dad hasn't changed much, has he?
Yeah.
Looks like a BBC presenter, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Is that the room? Yeah, down here.
I don't.
Was it pre?
I think it might be before we moved here. We didn't move here till 75, and if that's 74. Although I noticed, it's like what Nick says about things in the background. There's in there. Can you see the wall? There's a wall
right.
Which has got. How would you describe that wall?
Oh, that different kind of brick with the holes in.
Holes in.
The shapes in.
I was going to ask my mum because we've got that. Something like that on the patio down there. So when they moved, did they take that wall, or did they just like that pattern?
That's amazing.
And I don't know. There's those little things that you kind of sort of give you questions. That's my mum again. I think this is.
They are really nice quality as well.
That's my gran, but it's that's my dad's mum.
Yeah.
Who died in the mid '80s. But she's with my cousin in that one. I think that's my next to Auntie Jessie is, I think that's Uncle Jim, who is my dad's uncle and her husband. I think he and my granddad both died in 74, so I thought there were some photos with my granddad in, but maybe it was Uncle, maybe that's not true. Yeah. But I think I technically met Uncle Jim and I met Granddad, but I don't remember, but the photos prove I did, so. Not that that's a lot of consolation.
No, I didn't meet either of my mum's parents.
And that's my Auntie Sheila and my gran.
Don't just bet your dad's always had an old face, isn't he?
Well, he would have been in his mid 30s,
yeah.
At that point.
I've got a great uncle like that. I swear he was ageless. He lived to be very, very old. But as far as I'm concerned, he looked the same 50 years ago as he did. You know, it's an amazing, really, that he just had an older face.
You can see in these photos, again, you're saying about clues, you can see, I recognise that carpet. That carpet must have transferred over, come with us to this house. Mm-hmm. Because, and
it's still there, isn't it?
Those curtains. Well, sometimes sometimes I think the memory is sort of you picture, you might be in a house and your brain. I sometimes think that about, have we still got those curtains? Those curtains are like impacted in my brain. Mm-hmm. I mean, the curtains we've got in this room, they've been around all my life in different rooms. They still sort of, they're a little bit tatty behind the inside. What would you call the white
or whatever it is called?
It's the inlay thing is kind of frayed. You couldn't see it from the other side, and they've survived many years.
Oh, do let me scan these.
Yeah. The last one
I can do it whilst you're at my place.
The last one is a picture of me sitting on that looks like a very old style car, doesn't it? That doesn't look like the 70s. That looks like I've got some I've got some nice little sandals and some really mid 70s trousers and a tank top.
What a lovely bunch of photographs.
So that's why I had to kind of say, and Nick said, how funny how photos come towards you. I have seen a lot of those before.
Oh, magic!
But they're an extra set to have. Sorry, Toppy. What of these words were you going to discuss?
Oh, well, I just think that this is what is wonderful about photos, is just listening to you talk about them. It obviously brings back so many memories. Mm-hmm. And I just think generations from now, those sorts of remembrances just aren't going to happen. Mm-hmm. I think it's a terrible loss. So anyways.
Yeah.
So the word I keyed in on was reminder, and well, this will be short, but as I get older, I need more reminders. For example, I now cannot go from my apartment to my car without going back into my apartment at least once, if not 2 or 3 times, because I forgot something.
Yeah.
So, I mean, honestly, the worst one. And I do mental reminders. I haven't yet gotten to the point where I leave Post-it notes all over the place, but maybe that should be my next, But I have mental reminders, a mental checklist that I do. But I'll tell you what, the worst one is what happens to men when they get to be about my age and 60, that we put on our pants and don't zip up. What's that all about? Because I do it practically every day. And as I arrive at work and I'm walking to the sidewalk, I've come, that's sort of like the thing that makes me see, oh, for God's sake, check your zipper. Well, 9 times out of 10, it's not zipped. And thank God that walk, when I'm on that walk, it's like a physical reminder, oh, check your zipper. At least there's that. But what the hell? I never used to forget unzipping. God, I forget unzipping now.
Actually, this reminds me of a time in London where we saw someone. Now, at least you might have forgotten to zip up, but at least you got your trousers around the right way. we passed somebody in the in London Underground who not only had the zip undone, but they had their trousers around the wrong way, so they had their arse hanging out, and we could look out. There's a bum scare. I mean, I have to say, I have that leaving the house. Oh, and you've forgotten something. Usually, either a hat, or I even nearly forgot my pass key at work. So I wouldn't have got very far. So yeah, you're not alone in that. I'm always going back for things.
Yeah. So that's me. I go through mental reminders, and I think I need to graduate very soon to Post-it note reminders.
I put whatever I'm doing. I put in my diary at work. I kind of I've got to do this, that, and that, and that, and that. And I put reminders on my phone as well. A calendar on my phone.
Talking about reminders, I mean, I know you listeners and Toppy know that I found my 1990 diary. Depending on when this episode goes out, there's been an episode where Nick and I compare our 1990 diaries the same day.
The same instance, the same day, only interpreted in different ways.
I don't know when that's going out because I had some diary entries that were before that that I haven't gone out, so I haven't been able to put the episode out. Anyway.
Oh boy, I'm looking forward to that one. That's going to be interesting.
We will do more. It's just that I'm good. It's going to take us about 5 years to get through 1990 because I don't want the show to become the Paul 1990 Diary podcast.
Sure.
Sorry.
I was going to ask you guys. Okay, I've kept a diary at different times in my life, and maybe for a year or whatever. And then I petered off. But this is what happens, is I eventually find that diary and read it, and I'm so horrified and embarrassed that I rip it up.
Oh,
how have you kept yourself from being embarrassed and saying,
I love mine.
I know what I know exactly where you're coming from, because not so much 1990, but when I was writing the books about my series, the series I did with Paul and Joe, and I went back to my diaries to see exactly when I wrote things. And about 1982, 83, 84, I really am quite horrified to see what a selfish little monster I was. And when my dad was having a breakdown 40 years ago, and I just wasn't sympathetic at all. It was just poor me, and I hated school. I was hating what was happening to my dad. I was just in a miserable place, and I was a miserable person.
I don't have many years, and I certainly don't know that I've got any other year that's as detailed as 1990. So I'm like reading it, sort of like, what happens next? I'm like reading it like it's normal. I don't remember any of this. Well, I do remember something. It's not fair. That's not true. It's a very it's been very eye-opening because a lot of things happened. It was almost like the year where I got freedom, in that my parents didn't mind me going up to London to see friends, and I had a bit more freedom. I was going to the cinema by myself. Things that seem very day-to-day when you do them all the time, or maybe don't anymore. But once you have, when you first start doing this, and you first start getting that freedom, it's quite a big deal. So it's a great year to have.
It was an important year for me because it was the first year I got a girlfriend. I was very busy. I was running the Church of Young Communicants. I went to Austria. Paul and others like Keith and everything. They were a huge part of my life. And socially, I get exhausted reading those because how did I even sleep? Just there's so much we're doing. And I just thought my social life was busier then than it is now.
I'm a bit sort of, my brother's not very well, and I'm a bit like he's
that lightweight.
Yeah. I am keeping a diary this year. I was given a diary, like a day-to-day, very, very small, very small diary. I'll show it to Nick so you can see what I mean. It's not very big spaces, like a. Per day.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm
literally
using it just for, my handwriting isn't so good these days because of the rheumatism, so I don't want to write too much anyway. So I'm kind of, maybe I've said, talk to Toppy today, or did editing, finish this episode. It'll be more than I can remember in a year's time. No, in 10 years' time, than if I don't write it. So I thought it was given to me. I'm never going to use it as a diary because I'm just not very good at appointments and stuff like that. I'll write it down somewhere else, or I'll have it on my phone. So I thought if I'm going to have it, I'll make it a mini diary that by the time I get to episode 2000, I can dig it out again and read it. But we're going to have a little chat now about our experiences of conventions, because Toppy's recently been to a convention. So we will come back to this at the end of the episode, but maybe not random words, but I would like to do a couple of would you rather questions. But anyway, Toppy, you were going to tell us about the convention.
I went to a science fiction convention last weekend.
Oh, lovely.
In Maryland, which is about a 5-hour drive from here. Yeah. But that was my first time back since COVID.
Yeah.
It's a very small, modest convention. Mm-hmm. It's called Farpoint. And the only difference really are the guests, and they usually nail at least one. And this time it was Wilson Cruz, the doctor on the new Trek, Star Trek Discovery. Mm-hmm. But here's the problem. Well, you guys know this. Here's the problem with guests. They come with nothing except a pen to sign autographs for money. And then they do an hour in front of an audience. But what is that hour filled with? Questions from the audience. That's all they do. Every single time, every single one of them, they're there. They bring nothing with them. And then it becomes the questions from the audience. So the presentation is never... It's only as good as the questions from the audience.
It's got to the point now where Ali and I kind of go to, if we see if there's certain people going, we'll go. But things like the Doctor Who ones, the Doctors and Companions, you've kind of heard all the stories before. And we tend to go for, if guest stars, actors we like, are going, we'll go. I know there's one in Epsom, which is quite a regular feature now. Paul and I went to the first one of that about 5 years ago, and it was a good convention. But I don't know. There's all sort. If I'm busy or there's something on, or I back in the day I used to drop everything for a convention. Now it really has to grab me.
I might have gone if I'd heard people were going, but I don't think many people. One or two were going, but not the most.
I've got a feeling that was my last convention actually that I went to. I'm always up for another one.
I also had a few bad experiences in autograph queues. Not awful, horrendous ones, but they're rude. But just where some guests were less enthusiastic, then you stood in the queue for 3 hours, and then when you get there, they're kind of barely saying a word, looking quite grumpy. They tended to be people who weren't that necessarily regulars on the circuit at the time. Like when I went, and there was one of the big Finnish audios, Nick. There was Graham Garden.
That's right.
And we went there. And
I remember you texting me saying, "Oh, it was really boring,
really grumpy." And I was going to get an autograph myself, not because of the Doctor Who connection, but because of a series he was in the 70s, The Goodies, and he was just so unlikable, or just so like, "Why am I here?" sort of thing. I ended up sending the autograph I got for myself. My friend Kerry had asked for an autograph, so I got that, and I sent him my one as well.
You sent him your autograph?
I sent him my one. Well, no, I autographed something for him. No, I sent him the one well, they didn't used to charge. You didn't use. It's got a lot more money grabbing as well.
It has.
Like there was never any mention of you having to. There's like, if you're at a convention, you get one free. You might get one free autograph, and anything else you have to.
Yeah.
You have to buy. So you can't even bring a DVD cover. You have to buy their site. It just became a bit money.
I think the funniest signing I did was the most unique signing I did was with Henry Wolfe, who was in the Rocky Horror and played a villain in Doctor Who, and was in a children's series called Words and Pictures, which was quite famous at the time. A very diminutive actor with a kind of voice like this. And we turned up at Chiswick. Was it Chiswick or? Yeah, Chiswick Station. And as we went past, we noticed this little man looking at a rather crumpled Google map. And sure enough, it was Henry Wolfe. And we said, "Oh, hello, Henry. You go in the same place as we are." And of course, we had arrived to meet him at the convention. So, and we said, "Well, we'll walk with you." And so here we were walking with this sort of living legend who discovered Pinter and went to school with Pinter and sort of pioneered him. And he was so natural and lovely and just sort of enjoyed being with us. And we it was like going for a walk with your dad, it was amazing. And we had little adventures. We got into a taxi which was somebody else's taxi, and we were turfed out, and we had a really nice chat with him. And then of course we delivered him rather late to the signing, and then we queued up to meet him. It was surreal. But it was that was a magic time.
I think the annoying thing was, I think it was the same convention, or it was certainly around the same time, the same one as the Grumpy Man. There was Nicola Bryant, who played a companion called Perry with Colin Baker, and I think she had an accident at the time where she'd fallen off the stage.
That's right, yes.
She was in pain, and yet she came and she stood up because it was more comfortable for her to stand up. She stood up for 5 hours or something, signing autographs. The most generous, wonderful.
That's right.
And you think this person's sitting there being grumpy, and he's got nothing to be grumpy about.
I think it was a DVD of Vengeance on Varos, which was the Doctor Who tale that she was in. But what made me laugh, it sounds a bit sick to say made me laugh, was, of course, that also had a disabled actor called Nabil Shaban playing Syl, the alien, and he can't stand up because his legs are completely, they weren't developed properly. So I thought to myself, there's Nicola who can't sit down, and there's Nabil who can't stand up.
It's just that some people really make an effort, and you at times the experienced convention guests make a big effort because they've done it, and it's obviously they get paid. They do get paid for it.
Now Ingrid Pitt was, I'd heard of stories that she was a bit pushy and showy, but she came to she arrived at the convention straight from hospital where she'd had pneumonia and a stroke, double pneumonia and a stroke, and she really wasn't very well, and she died later that year. And she was at an event in Chiswick, and she was literally between questions, she was gasping for breath. She really was in a bad way. And her husband was there and looked terrified. And she actually saw each and every, against advice, saw each and every fan, posed with each and every fan and signed for each and every fan. And I was just so impressed with that, because there was this screen legend from the Hammer films, and she was, no word of a lie, she was dying in front of your eyes. And yet she was still giving it all, real trooper.
Yeah, it's something really, because there really are stars that respect and are glad to be around their fans. Yeah. Of course, the darker side an example is Stan Lee, the previous one-time publisher and editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics. And he became very frail in his last years, and his wife had died. Now, his wife was the one who always took care of him, right? And she wouldn't let anyone take advantage of him. And she was really good at it. Well, she died, and then his daughter, who's not a very nice person, and some lawyers and other people dragged Stan Lee around to conventions to make thousands and thousands of dollars from his signature on things. And he was sitting there, and there are videos of this. It's tragic. He's sitting there not knowing where he is. He's just shoving things in front of his face to sign, and they're saying, sign your name. And he's just and it's like, it's horrible.
I must admit, another Hammer legend, Barbara Shelley. She was at a signing we went to in about 2010, and she was, of course, quite a sex symbol and all that jazz in her time with the Hammer films. And she pretty well had a stroke, and she got very confused and couldn't hear very well, and sort of shuffled off in one of the, like a wheeler. And she eventually died about 11 years later, but I was amazed she lasted that long, because she was so frail. And I met her.
Yeah, Nick and I met together. The only cast member of Dark Shadows I've ever met, Catherine Lee Scott.
Oh, she was lovely.
Now she's a convention pro.
Yeah.
She knows. She's one of them that's done it. She makes herself available, and sure, she has stuff to sell. Make no mistake, but
she's done it in 2000.
Yeah, it was just. I don't even know I don't know why she was there. It must have been one of her books or one of the Dark Shadows.
But no, she was charming.
Dark Shadows just doesn't have that, or certainly didn't have that following. There wasn't. I don't remember seeing many other people there, whether we were early or late or whatever.
No,
you probably have seen her in other things she's been in that weren't, like she was in Space 1999 and things like that. But,
and I think I'm fairly certain she's in A Return of the Saint.
Yeah.
But
I think she married, when she left Dark Shadows, she married somebody and moved to Paris, I think. So she would have been more European based by the early to mid 70s.
Yeah, she shows up in a lot of odd things. She was she's just shows up randomly over the years on TV shows, in a small part. I mean, she was on an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation. But I sympathize with them because most, they travel. Most, involves getting on a plane, leaving home, staying at a hotel, and you do all of that, and someone stands up and asks you for the 5 millionth time, well, Mr. Cruz, in episode 5 of Discovery, when you were taken over by that alien, well, that was really cool. And then you said this, and the alien said that. That was great. Oh my God!
They often it's almost not a question. It's a little monologue that they deliver to the person on the stage, and then the person on the stage goes, "Yeah, that's right. That's what happened." There was no question there.
There was one time where I was at a convention. There was a 60s Doctor Who companion, Annette Wells, and somebody with, I think, either learning difficulties or a speech impediment asked a question, and it was really awkward because she couldn't understand a word he was saying, and it's just sort of, couldn't you? And it sounded like when you were smoking in a coffin in Skaro or something. It's really poor on Annette Wells and go, sorry, what's he saying?
Do they do like charity auctions at the ones you've been to? Because that used to be a bit of a thing. People bidding for ridiculous things, or
they do, and I think they raised a couple thousand, which is cool. I mean, it's nice that they do that.
Somebody bought a bread roll that
sausage,
a sausage roll that one of the Doctor Who companions,
and they ate it on the way home.
They paid money for charity for a sausage roll that Sophie Aldred had half eaten, and then Nick said they kind of got hungry on the way home and just ate it.
I wasn't at that convention. The story has passed into legend. We know the person in question, and he's a bit strange.
Didn't Sophie Aldred have to? She's one of the companions from the last era of the last companion, really. Before it finished, but she came back in the most recent episode, which was very, very good. But didn't she have another story where wasn't she having to do some sort of eating competition at a convention?
Something like that, yeah.
And she got stuck like one of a donut eating competition, and she got.
That was one of her. I think it might have been one of her first conventions or something. And she nearly choked to death on stage.
Oh dear!
That's on the Blu-ray. There's a video footage of that nearly choking.
Not to mention she nearly drowned filming an episode of Doctor Who, where she was in a it was a cliffhanger where she's in a tank. Well, they're underwater, and she gets trapped in something, and the door comes down, and it starts to flood. And in real life, the glass started to crack, and which would have meant water all over electricity, and she would have been electrocuted. Luckily, Sylvester McCoy saw what was happening and said, "Turn the light, turn the power off."
Luckily, Sylvester McCoy was electrocuted instead.
I didn't say that. I did not say that, listeners. If this bit gets used, I did not say that. No, he saw that something was happening, and he got them to turn the power off, and she was winched out of the thing, but she could have. So poor Sophie.
Oh, yeah, frightening. Suffering. Talk about suffering through art.
But it's funny how certain things, like, I remember when I watched that was so much more powerful. When I watched that, I knew that had happened.
Yeah.
And it made it. I was scared for Sophie and excited about the episode. So it was double. It had double the impression, which somebody just watching it would just think, oh, someone's.
Well, it's another of our friends was actually both excited and because. For another reason, because Sophie Aldred getting wet in that costume got her all unnecessary.
That's something completely different. Yeah, I was talking about this the other day, or thinking about it, that people always say that spoilers are a bad thing, but sometimes, particularly on films like slasher films, where people get attacked and Oh yeah, they're going to survive this because they always survive it. But the most recent Scream film, Scream 5, or it wasn't called that, it's just called Scream, but they were killing off one of the established characters.
Yeah.
But I'd kind of got bored waiting to see it because I wasn't quite sure when I was going to see it, and I kind of wandered onto Wikipedia and I'd read the spoiler that this character was killed off. And when I did see it at the cinema, it was actually much more effective because I think if I'd have watched it, I'd have thought, oh yeah, he's going to be okay. They're always okay, and I would have missed the moment. But because I knew this was it, when it was coming up, I was like, oh no, it's going to go. Oh dear.
It's like the cute kid. You always think you always see in films, cute kid. Oh, they're going to survive. Would be lovely if they were killed off in the first 5 minutes.
Actually, sometimes I think the right spoilers actually make you appreciate what's coming up.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's strange. Do they do cabarets at the sort of conventions you go to?
I think the closest they come to that is what they call their masquerade. And I'm just specifically talking about Farpoint because, frankly, it's the only one I've been to multiple times now. But and masquerade is essentially a costume contest where the people who do cosplay show off what they've created. And there's awards and things. And part of that is usually a couple of paid performers. This time they had two stand-up comics, probably from New York City, and both of them did their entire routine based on Star Trek. And one was really good and really funny, and one was just okay. But anyways, I think that's the closest to that at least this convention gets.
They sometimes do ones we went to, didn't they?
Well, they did. Anthony Ailey did a whole cabaret act, didn't he, with corny jokes and.
Did he do magic or something?
He did magic that was a little bit obvious because you could see if you looked at there was a mirror behind him and you could see him doing all the business.
Put that mirror behind him.
There was also because he had a few jibes at the production team because he fell out with the producer and the producer's partner, who was a dancer, saying, actually, I saw his last show. At least I hope it was his last show. He was a bit freaky, wasn't he, Anthony Ailey?
He was, yeah, but then it was because he played a baddie, so sometimes it was, I think, where it kind of transferred off.
Yeah, the edges between fact and fiction started to blur a little bit.
Slipping in and out of character. And if you met him in the hallway, he'd be still the master. He'd be the master.
Yeah.
Like 10 years after he'd last played him or whatever.
Oh, and here's the last thing I'll say about conventions, and this is conventions of all types. I'm quite convinced. Doesn't matter if it's a leather convention full of gay men who love to dress in leather, or Dark Shadows, or Farpoint. One of the main reasons they go is to hook up and have a sexy night of fun with some anonymous partner. I know this is true because I've seen it. After everything is done on the main night where they do masquerade, that's their main thing, because not a whole lot happens on Friday, not a whole lot happens on Sunday. But Saturday, they have a lot, and the finale is the masquerade, and then there's a dance somewhere, music and booze. And people lap up that booze, and inhibitions are loosened.
This is what I've done all those years when I was in my years. I would have loved to have gone to something like that.
No, I'm serious. And then, the hooking up commences, and there are people that come every year and throw a toga party where they say, just rip the sheet off your bed and come to our room, and that's all they're wearing. And of course, hijinks ensue, and it's just a merry old time because then the party continues in that room. And I just know this is one of the main reasons this happens.
I'm sure they happened. They just didn't happen to us.
I know it would have been.
Nick and I would retire to our shared twin room and talk.
Yeah, that's the trouble. We always stayed in rooms with friends. You know, you couldn't really take someone back to your room.
Not that
I was ugly as sin in those days anyway, which probably didn't help.
Not that neither of us were ever approached by somebody saying, "Would you like to?" So,
yeah. I think there was hijinks though. There was a Doctor Who convention in Swindon, which I stayed overnight to, and it had Doctor Who in these kind of metal words that you pin on a board. You know, like the single letters that make it up. And someone got drunk one night and changed it around to Dr. Whores, which we got a firm rap on the knuckle from the MC the next morning. It wasn't anything to do with us, but you know, it was sort of, no, we won't be invited back. Sure enough, we weren't invited back.
I mean, we talked about it before about how one of our friends who's an actor, no longer with us, Michael Sheard, who was in Doctor Who and all sorts of programs, including things like Star Wars. And
indeed, he was Hitler in the Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
And he was a very nice man. And he was one of the few people who would stay beyond the cabaret to the disco and would be like making sure everyone was having a good time at the disco and joining in on the dance floor. And we're not talking about a guy in his 30s, talking about a guy in his 50s or 60s.
You know, he was about a good 30 plus years older than us.
But he had a lot of energy, and he'd also played a school teacher in a show called Grange Hill, a kids program, and was kind of well known to our generation as this sort of fierce teacher,
as well as all these characters in Doctor Who.
Yeah,
and he was just amazing. He was down with the kids. You know, he was on the dance floor as long as we were.
And he'd be playing. They'd always play "School's Out for Summer" by Alice Cooper when he reflecting that character he played, and he did his various different autobiographies, and he did one about.
We got into it.
Yeah, well, I think we might have read our bits on a previous episode, but that was not. And I think my bit was about being at a convention and sort of cringing when that fan asks that question that always gets asked.
What's your favourite story?
Yeah, what's your favourite monster?
I have one last question for both of you regarding conventions.
Yeah.
So both of you have written a book together, for example, and I just wondered if you would ever consider going to conventions. I'm not sure which one would be best, but just using the buying a table to sell your books. Have you ever considered that?
I don't think that I was going to say to Nick, because when you went to Farpoint, like some of the earlier ones, they allowed you to do a seminar about podcasting and things, didn't they? Was that a Farpoint?
Yes, it was. And anybody who, we this is the first year we didn't do a presentation.
Because I don't think that was ever really, in the time we went to conventions, I don't think that was ever really something that members of the public or fans that had because I guess when we went to conventions most, it was sort of 90s and noughties and so before podcasts. So I guess now you would hope that some of these kind of borderline famous podcasts, Doctor Who podcasts that aren't done by bigwigs but are done by sort of fans would do what you did, but I don't know because I haven't been to enough recent conventions.
I must admit, I mean, obviously we've between us, although we've written the one book together, we've written loads of books separately, and I think probably to make it viable, we'd take across other sort of books that we've had in the past as well. But I mean, if there was interest and if there was a table. And and it wasn't too expensive, and they wouldn't mind us doing it. Then
the way it works at Farpoint is if you've got something to sell, it almost doesn't matter what it is because the vendor's room, which is actually a long hallway. I mean, there was everybody creating anything you can imagine that barely had anything to do with science fiction. And of course, sure, there were a lot of dealers selling, Star Trek toys and books and blah, blah, blah. But I mean, a lot of them were barely connected in any way. They were just somebody crafty who did something clever with something.
Yeah.
And anyways, they buy a table and they sit there for the 3 days and sell as much as they can. And for the people that want to do a presentation, the way that works is these go on all day long on Saturday and Sunday, and they have little rooms where they put a sign up that says, this is what's happening in this room at this hour. And people go in and present whatever they're presenting. And, a handful of people go in and listen, or sometimes, a lot of people go in and listen. But that's how that works, is that's going on throughout the day. And you may be doing your presentation right when, Wilson Cruz is doing his. But
something's overlap. Yeah, they used to have things that overlapped, or you could. I remember we got told off once, Nick and I, for going to the cinema during a panel. We were kind of, I think it was Scream 2 or 3 or something. Yeah, and we were kind of like, we've seen this guy. Yeah. We're going to go to the cinema, and we got told off. Oh, you can't miss this sketch.
Well, but it was about 99, 2000. And by that time, we'd gone to enough conventions to know, you'll get that story from that person. And there were certain people I really wanted to see. And
we went to a writers' panel, didn't we? And that crashed with something else.
Yeah, I went to a writers' workshop with the late Chris Boucher, who wrote Doctor Who and script edited and wrote for Blake Seven. And I particularly I've always admired his work. And of course, I wanted, and still do, want to get, sort of, with the writing. So, and I'm very glad I went to that one.
That's what they call them. They call them panels here too. Yeah.
Well, we've often sort of joked about, at a fantasy Sutton Park convention, or trouble is,
or Maggie's editor.
Yeah, or trouble is, the only people who would be in the audience would be people who were on the stage.
Well, the thing is, years ago, because my 2 series, The Magnet Editor and Life After, around about 91, Paul joined the writing team, and we did do, as part of one of his Beaches sketches, in 91 we did do a sort of Forks convention, and my writing partner Joe came along, and we did do a question and answer, and Paul joined us and did some question and answers.
I guess some of the things we've done for the podcast, where we've talked about filming, or we've talked is kind of our fantasy, it's a kind of convention panel, except that it's going out to listeners rather than us being in one venue. Also, the book that we did, although it couldn't be deemed as sci-fi, it did have a quirky fantasy element, which you kind of is left a little bit ambiguous. It's not kind of full-blown aliens, full-blown this, full-blown that. It's actually quite mysteriously done, and so it isn't completely your plain Jane sort of. And also the 2 books that I did were novelizations. 2 other books I did were novelizations of my own stories from my own series. So back in the 80s, 90s, and there is a site. There would be a sci-fi. But no, if somebody could find me a table, lead me to it. We probably mentioned it before, maybe, but when Nick used to do his tape scene RPS. One day we were at a convention, and there was a dealer's room, and they were selling a copy of RPS, which was free. It was never meant to be so.
It wasn't a particularly good issue either.
It must have been that somebody had got a copy, and it somehow found its way to the dealer's hand, and he was trying to sell it back to the punters.
And there was a few friends of ours who said, I'd raised a complaint about that. I was actually so flattered it was there, I didn't mind a scrap. Years later, we've got some video footage of that, it being there. Years later, that one was going on eBay for about £2.50. Again, it was free when it came out. And the way it's described is, this is how convention fans celebrated the show in those days. It made me feel like a museum exhibit. And I, or certainly in the glass case. And it was interesting, you know, that it's out there. And of course, at the moment, I'm working on a book with a guy called Alan Hayes, who had his own tape scene, which was a rather bigger fry than mine. And we are scouring the world for every single Doctor Who tape scene that ever existed. My own's in there. Paul's a one-off one that Paul did, or two that Paul did are in there, and many of our friends ones they did. And we're having a whale of time kind of pulling this whole history together and searching out for these tapes, however many still exist.
Probably, as I was saying to Nick, whereas if someone asked me to talk about Sutton Park, which took up 8 years of my life almost on a daily basis, I would have anecdotes. Even if I couldn't tell you a day-by-day account, I would certainly have anecdotes because that's a big bit of history. But asking me to talk about a one-off tape zine I did 30-something years ago that I didn't repeat and I haven't listened to for 30 years is a lot harder because it's not such a big part of your life. And I hadn't thought about it until it turned up in a box. Sort of thing. So it's harder to kind of think of the anecdotes for the one-off things.
Similarly with the films. I mean, I remember them all because I did them, I wrote them, and I did them for years. Yeah. Whereas sometimes you'll come across people that were in them and they can't remember. Yeah, they can remember diddly squat about being in it. So,
one of the things I wanted to say before we move back to the random questions and things is that one convention I always wanted to go to, and I guess it's not quite like Farpoint or like the Doctor Who conventions we went to. That was the Pride 48 meetups in Vegas and New Orleans, which I would have liked to have gone to, partly because of my health that never happened, and COVID as well. But you went to one, didn't you, in Vegas?
Yes, I did.
That must be weird because that was exactly much more like what you were saying, because that was lots of shows coming together, and it's probably the nearest you would have got to being up on stage but even weirder because you're doing a live show in front of the audience, aren't you, as well? Yeah.
There's a videotape of me on Facebook somewhere doing my show, and that was a lot of fun. They did a very decent job organizing it, and basically all day long, 1 hour was blocked out for anybody to basically do their show live, and most of them took questions from the audience or what have you. And those podcasts were streaming live, so there was a contingent of people at home participating in a chat room, and the chat room was projected onto a screen, so you could even have people live there talking to people at home and answering their questions or whatever. So it was rather well done, and most people really enjoyed it. And then there were other things, social gatherings like a breakfast, or there were organized trips where we would go together to some thing in Vegas, etc. So all in all, it was, a fun weekend for everybody.
Definitely a blurring between listeners who become well-known as listeners as well. Like Big Fatty will have listeners who send messages in, and those voices become almost, they are an integral part of his show, and they become as well known that they're slightly different to the people who lurk or just don't engage directly.
That was the other part of it is a lot of not just people who did podcasts showed up, but listeners showed up. And it was just as much for them, and they made it much more fun.
Certain shows facilitate that really well, and some podcasters who did their own podcast but have kind of stopped podcasting, like Scotty the Aussie Battler, for instance, who was also been on. Well, he sent things into you, and he was on my show when I met him in London, and but he's sort of still a regular voice on Big Fatty, sending. So he's sort of not totally gone, from recording, but sending messages sort of obviously is something he still enjoys doing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I think actually one thing they didn't quite do, which would have been interesting, that as far as I know, they never did panels. Like, it wouldn't have been interesting if you'd have had a panel with you and so from another podcast, and so perhaps hosts of shows who don't necessarily always. I think it would give some hosts of shows are very much, I'm doing my show, and maybe I have my friend who is also a podcast who's on my show, but they don't necessarily integrate across perhaps the whole channel, or they're not like a big fatty in that way. And doing a panel where you're on stage with 5 other podcasters, perhaps of shows you don't even listen to, you might hear some things that actually that would be quite interesting, and the people in the audience might think, oh, it's really good to have Toppy and Taffy and all on one stage answering questions together. And I don't think that ever happened.
Well, it did, because there, what tended to happen is people would get together and decide to do exactly that, and there'd be a group of podcasters who never podcasted together all up there doing a 1-hour thing. So it did happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's slightly different, because I don't know how often they do it when you're at a convention, and it might, because we went to conventions that were just Doctor Who, but we also went to conventions that were a little bit Doctor Who, a little bit Blake Seven, or a little bit, or we did do a few. There were the odd convention where it was more like an cult TV convention, or so you might get people who are on completely different shows up on stage. Whereas at a Doctor Who convention, everybody has got that connection that they were somehow involved in Doctor Who, even if they were involved in Doctor Who in different eras of the show, and never actually had met before until that convention. They do something on the Blu-ray releases of Doctor Who, where they sort of borrowed from an idea. There was a TV program we had over here where people would watch TV, this week's TV. The different households would be watching it, and they would film them commenting, and it would make for sometimes quite good TV. Well, they started doing that with the Doctor Who Blu-rays, where they have perhaps 4 different groups. They might have the Doctor and the companion who are in the episodes on that Blu-ray, but they'd have also
a past Doctor.
A past or future, depending on what era it is. So you might have an 80s Doctor Who companion. You might have a 60s Doctor Who companion watching an 80s era and going, "Gosh, they had better budgets then," or vice versa.
They've even got some new people
who
are actually kinder about the show than some of the 80s ones.
Well, with the current show, there are probably a lot more people who are our age who grew up liking the old show and are now excited to be involved in the current show. So they may already have come with a sort of affection for the old show, even though they're in the much more higher budget.
There was a guy, particularly the one I bought at Christmas time, or Ali bought for me, was with the John Pertwee season from 1971, and they had the introduction to the Master, and it has the very latest Master, who's sort of his late 30s, watching the very first one, and he's actually really fascinated to see the beginnings of that character.
Because unless you do your own research, I don't know how much they would kind of say, just make it your own. They don't necessarily want you to be too influenced. So unless you do your own research, sometimes you hear where like the new person playing the Doctor might be allowed to watch tapes of the old Doctors, just to kind of get a feel for, because with the Doctor they tend to, now and again you'll have perhaps a later Doctor exhibiting certain traits that are familiar to the audience. Oh, look, he's he's done something that's very Third Doctor-ish, or he's done something very Tom Baker-ish, or he's done. Sometimes it helps the actors to kind of show that it's meant to be the same person.
Matt Smith was very influenced by Two the Sidemen and Patrick Troughton's performance, which is why we got a sort of Troughton-esque Doctor with him.
So yes, right. Well, we'll do a few Would You Rather questions before we say goodbye. I don't know if we've done any of these with you before, Toppy, but we have. Nick and I have. So yes, the first one is: would you rather move to a new city every month, or stay in the same location for your entire life?
That's an easy one for me. Stay in one location.
It's an easy one for me as well, because I've done exactly that.
So yeah, I certainly thought that that Nick would say that, because you have always you've moved around a little bit more though, Toppy, haven't you?
Not really. I mean, my only moving around was born in Pickle Hollow. After college, left Pickle Hollow. 30 years later, came back to Pickle Hollow. The only other place I lived was Rochester, New York, for those 25 or 30 years or whatever. So, no, I haven't moved around a lot. Yeah. I'm living right now on the same road I grew up on, and 2 doors down from the parents, the home that I grew up in. So.
It's same as. I mean, we moved back to the area that I grew up in 10 years ago. And literally, I walked down the street. We walked down the hill that I went to school. I walked up to school. We would go past my old school, and the pub I put up at, should I say, as I was there last night, is the pub I spent the first 10 years of my life living next door to. So when I go and accompany the people on a fag break, as I am inclined to do, I look up at my old home, and because I used to be able to see the courtyard of the pub from my bedroom, and I always knew it was terribly late because the courtyard light would be off. It's past 11.
I mean, I have lived in other places, but I haven't lived in that many other places. My parents still live in the same house that they built in 1975. I still come back to Salisbury all the time to see them and to see Nick. I went to Birmingham for university, and then I moved to Surrey, and I've stayed within 10, 15 miles of that town. So I've stayed in Surrey, and I've stayed in the same flat for over 20 years. So, but I feel like I would have been up for moving around more, but then also, once I made friends in Surrey, I was kind of like, well, I like these friends. I don't want to go somewhere else when I have to make new friends. It's not that easy to, the first job I had in Camberley was where I met Callum, and I met Wifey Joe and a number of other people. And I've never had a job that was as good for making friends. I'm still in touch with a number of people from that job. The next job was I was in touch. I stayed in touch with a few. The next job, less and less. The jobs I've had, less and less. Even though there's been the potential for it. When I worked in smaller towns, like where I met Callum, those were the friendships where you sort of saw them more. When I started working in London, everyone is a lot more scattered. You come to the central area of London and do your job, and then you go back, and everybody can be completely different parts of within a certain radius. But it's not quite so easy as having friends who live in the same town. So like with you, Nick, with having a job in Salisbury, there's potential that you could socialise with people from that job if you wanted to, because they might just live down the road.
Yeah, the thing is, a friend of mine asked me a few years back now when, because she's getting itchy feet and wanting to move to another city. I just said, don't you ever have the urge to? Don't you want to leave and spread your wings? I said, no, because I like to keep in touch with people. If I stay where I am, people know where I am. And to be honest, I can't. There is virtually no part of Salisbury that doesn't have a memory for me, because I've been here my family moved here 55 years ago, just before I was born. And The one thing I would say is, as an alternative, flipping on its back, as an alternative, I do wonder what life would have been like if we had stayed in Bromley, because we moved from Bromley in Kent in 1968, just before I was born. Now, I actually went there in 2016 because I was very, very curious to see the road where my parents and sister spent the 60s, and throughout the 60s, from 60 to 68. And I went there. It was a lovely area, and I saw the place where my sister grew up. And I did wonder, if my dad hadn't wanted to give up office work and study nursing, and remember our associations with Salisbury go back to the war, because my aunt was a pharmacist at the hospital I work now in, albeit in a more reduced form. But and so he'd always had established a sort of a liking for Salisbury, which and the hospital has been there since the war. So it was he moved here to study nursing, and it all went horribly wrong, and he had a breakdown. And so if he had stayed where he was, maybe he wouldn't have had a breakdown, and maybe wouldn't have, but then Salisbury wouldn't be on my map. So it's a catch-22.
But
fascinating alternative.
Yeah, it's not entirely impossible. Things could have been different for me, because my dad was offered a job in Salisbury, but they lived in High Wycombe, which was much closer to London, and that's where both of them met. So if we hadn't come to Salisbury, or the job had been somewhere else, we might be somewhere else. But that was a little bit before I was born. We moved to this area.
I'm not saying I don't have regrets. For example, I really wish that I would have been bold enough not to go to college, but to go and move to New York City and give it a shot, because I feel like I would have been at the center of where comic books were being created. It was before rents went way out of control. I would have had probably a rent-protected apartment somewhere. And I think I could have seriously devoted years to getting good enough to be a professional comic book artist. And I really think that's where I would have headed. And I think I probably would have gotten into the business. But that never happened, and I never did go. But it's still a regret,
One of the things that I came across, Nick, when I was doing one of those episodes where I used the archive material, is one of the bits I didn't use because it didn't really fit with what I was trying to, because the audio messages, they weren't meant to be podcasts, but if you go through them, you can sculpt them into something, and whereas you might be talking about something, and then they stick a song on, or they change the subject and they come back to it. The power of podcasting is that you can chop out all the bits that aren't relevant and make it look like the conversation was all about music in the first place, or whatever. You were talking about your then engagement, and that there was potential that you might have been offered a job in Holland. I can't imagine. I can't imagine Nick being in Holland. I don't think you could imagine it then.
I think there was this. Her cousin, my then fiance's cousin, had a daughter called Doreen Ellen, who my parents used to go over regularly to Bristol and meet up, and visit the family, and we used to be sat through hours and hours and hours and hours of Doreen Ellen. She was only 2 at the time.
I sort of remember that myself when I came to visit.
And she's I'm on Facebook with this cousin who's her mother. And there are still pictures of Doreen Ellen, but who's now obviously over 30. And she actually did a cover. She was a model. She became a model, and she. I went. I was at her second birthday, but she did a almost like a Vogue thing with a Bristol, the Bristol beauty, and she, a good-looking girl, but she grow up to be. But there was endless with it, and I think it was part of the sort of kind of. Once we're married, da-di-da-di-da. And I think this family, which is now, I think, back in Bristol, were based in Holland. And I think I have vague memories of they were, you never know, they can set you up with a job in Holland. But you're quite right. I can't imagine myself in Holland in a million years. But there was all sorts of possibilities flying around about that time.
Obviously, I had a relationship with somebody from America who came over here, but I don't know what the situation would have been had it been suggested that I move over to America. I can't really imagine that because I'm sort of got too many friends over here to think about. Mm-hmm. I don't know that. I mean, that was sort of before podcasting as well, where it was I'd say yes, okay, but I have to live next door to Toppie Smelly, please. And then I'd never see my husband. Well, I don't see him anywhere more again anyway. But I would never see my husband again because I'd be so busy podcasting with Toppie. It would have caused a lot of problems. Most probably.
Also, I think he's more or less he's quite happy living in.
He was it was never going to happen because he was quite an Anglophile, but that's one of the reasons he wanted to come over here. But yeah, I mean, I guess it just a switch of circumstance and.
There was a time when, I don't know about Holland, but there was certainly a time when I was engaged to Tina that I was looking to move to Bristol. I see, it was a serious consideration. We split up in the June, July of that year. It was a bit like 30 years ago. And so it never came to anything, but I don't think I would have been at all happy moving to Bristol.
Mm-hmm. Another question, would you rather be stuck in a cave for a day or stuck in an elevator for a day? Sometimes these questions are kind of a bad thing, but I mean, both of those sound pretty bad.
No, got to be cave for me.
I think it would be cave for me.
I'd probably take a camera with me and got lots of shots for.
Yeah, depends what sort of cave it was. On the other hand, there's the film The Descent, where some people they go caving and they find all these beasties under, and it's a really good creepy film. But there are bits when you see people potholing and they're having to squiggle through really really small, and the idea of being trapped, like I sort of have a, somewhere like a cave, like those caves where they invite people to come and walk around. Those are very interesting, but some of the ones where it's potholing.
It depends whether I'm with someone.
Yeah.
If I was with a pretty company, for example.
Elevator can be bad because you have got a very little room.
Yeah.
And I don't know. What about you, Toppie?
Well, so the elevator has far fewer unknowns than a cave because I can't think of. Well, it would be pretty bad if I was in a cave with no light and it was damp and cold.
Yeah,
that would be bad.
Yeah,
and I'd really rather be stuck in a small elevator because small spaces don't really bother me. And I think I'd much rather have that than being in a cold, dark place. Now, I can envision an elevator that totally loses power and there's no light either. But I'm sorry, I at least know that there's four walls and a ceiling protecting me from something awful.
No scary monsters like down in caves. Or just in that film. But there we go.
My only retraction would be if the elevator was hanging by a thread. But then that would be a different story.
Yeah, if it was Towering Inferno or something like that. I think I'll take the case.
I mean, if I had my phone plenty of battery, I'd just catch up on podcasts or do some recording and do some editing. Probably the last one for today because we've been talking for quite a while, completely out of order, so it's difficult to take in how long we've been recording. But would you rather have a song that you hate stuck in your head or an itch you can't reach for a year? I guess is that the song for a year? I guess that's the song and the itch. So neither. I mean, both Toppie and I have done episodes about like earworms and things. We both took a different take on it. But so I guess that's what they're. So would you? But would you rather have an earworm that was awful a song you hated stuck in your ear, stuck in your head, or an itch. Itches are annoying at the best of times. But,
I'm itching as we speak. I mean, I've had an allergy problem for over a year now, which is they think is probably gluten intolerance, but without a
so you've had this.
Damage. So I've actually had it. So I'll go for the earworm. I've had it with itching, so I will definitely go for the earworm. I have to put up with earworms I don't like anyway, because my colleagues listen to absolute drivel on the radio. No democracy in our office whatsoever, or pretend mock democracy. Can't support democracy, but it's both. I've suffered both in my times.
What about you?
Boy. Well, I am very susceptible to repeating songs that I hear. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's just somebody in the next car on their radio or whatever, that song will be repeated in my head for definitely the rest of the day. Because I'm a silent whistler, I do
oh yes,
and I'm doing that, and then I just repeat it over and over and over and over. That doesn't drive me crazy, even if it's a song I don't like, although I occasionally catch myself saying, stop, just stop to myself. There is nothing quite so annoying and awful as an itch you can't scratch. Oh, no thank you. No thank you, ma'am. I'll take the earworm.
I have a it's become like you have to be careful with itches. If you don't, you can as well. If you scratch too much, you can give yourself infections and things. Or you don't realise how badly you've scratched. But I have a shoehorn. It was meant to be a shoehorn from IKEA. It's perfect as a back scratcher. It's just length to it. I don't use it as a shoehorn, but I definitely. I'm feeling itchy now talking about it. We should probably stop.
We have a back scratcher, which is perfect as a back scratcher.
Well, I'd like to have a. I would like to know.
We bought it in Wales in 1980, and it's been a permanent fixture.
The itches that back scratcher must have seen.
Oh.
So I count as one of my most valuable possessions this object I have in my hand right now. It's wooden, and it's a wooden stick basically. Somebody carved a kitty head on one end, and the other end somebody carved a cat's paw, and it's meant to be a back scratcher, and it's a lifesaver. It's a lifesaver.
You scratch with?
Yeah.
You scratch with the paw?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I've never heard of a back scratcher until there was an episode from about 1970s of the Dick Emery show, which is a comedy show, and they did an episode filmed abroad, and one character bought a back scratcher, and I thought, oh wow, I've never seen one of those before. And the end of those on the Dick Emery show was actually quite savage. There's real claws.
Listeners, we hope you're not itchy listening to this episode, but we're going to have to say goodbye. So, thank you to Nick. Thank you to Toppy for talking about these random words and would you rathers and convention experiences, and hope to get you back together again soon.
Yeah, it's been a gas.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Toppy.
Thank you. Take care, Nick.
Yeah, thank you. And your good self.
We'll speak to you
Until
again
next time.
Yeah. Bye for now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh, boy.
Did you hear Stella Stevens has died from sudden dementia?
Oh, yeah, she's the one that was with Ernest Borgnine, and she dies at the very end.
Yeah, she died yesterday. So,
yeah.
I liked her. I also liked her in an American soap called Flamingo Road, which was back in the day. I had a bit of a crush on her. That and Poseidon, actually. She's very sexy in Poseidon.
Yeah. I've noticed because it goes, it's you would have to expect it. But a lot of the people that I think of as stars, were probably 20 years older than me, and it's come to the point where they're all dying.
It's very true. I mean, we were lucky to have Ernest Borgnine as long as we did. And a lot of them, because Sudden Adventure is one of my great favourite films. I watched it over the New Year to tie in with the 50th anniversary, but I actually watched it in real time. So when they say Happy New Year, it was actually New Year.
And then I had to stand outside his flat with this big hose pipe and flood his flat. And then he had to do the ventilation stuff.
Well, my timeline was a bit lost because there was a bit of faff at the beginning with the channels. So we had to fast forward through one scene, I think, to catch up. But it pretty well worked quite well. And we were all wide awake at sort of nearly 2 o'clock when the film ended.
I gotta go now. Bye. I wasn't done with you. Gotta go. Bye. Goodbye. It's been good, but yeah, definitely time to come home now.
Wow, really? No kidding.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
This show is part of the Pride 48 network. Find more shows over at pride48.com.
What's going on now? Oh, it's the Shy Life Podcast.
Let's go.
I have a voice. I have a voice.
You have a voice.
You have a voice. We have a voice.
We have a voice.
Unique voices in podcasting.
UnivazPods.net.
This isn't the first time I've realized it, but I've just been reminded of how my podcast has become my journal.
Yeah.
Because a big part of it is doing a personal journal and recounting something that happened. And I just was reminded that all that's preserved now for the last over 12 years or whatever it's been, 14, I don't know. And I just realized, that's been my diary, is my podcast.
Yes. And Sutton Park was a form of diary, because sometimes, obviously a lot of the times, it was completely ridiculously not my real life, but there were things or people that would come into it, that I would have a party scene and it would have been from a real party, or I would have taken my camera into university. I know I was.
You'll come and see me in the shop, and there I am as I would be dressed at the time.
Did I record in your shop?
No, just outside.
Outside.
So I think one of the last ones we copied was you meet me at lunch.
I was watching
Paul for lunch. And we'd do some
I was watching something from sort of the early summer of '95, and I'd obviously taken my camera in because we were doing our finals, and it was probably the last time I was going to see some of the people. So I recorded us hanging out in the coffee room and stuff, and that was for memento's sake rather than. But Paul the character was a student in Birmingham, so I go in and out of fiction in the same way as I do on the podcast. But it's you just have to remember which bits weren't real. That jelly monster, you didn't really have a friendship with that jelly. He didn't exist. He was a jelly. You ate him 5 minutes after that scene.
Oh my God, there's nothing I like better is when another new episode of the Shy Life Podcast comes out.
I don't know. It's like he puts out 20,000 episodes a month.
I don't know, but sometimes this show is really weird.
Yeah, that's perfectly normal. On the Shy Life Podcast, perfectly normal.
649.
649.
649. Wow, that was a good episode.
649.
So how are you?
I'm pretty good. I feel very morning-y at the moment.
Yeah.
But no, I'm waking up. I'm feeling pretty good.
I just say,
sorry, we've got the arrival of tea, which doesn't stop us recording, but it's just arriving.
I'm blue, aren't I?
Bless you.
I'm blue.
Hang on, there's a Matt there.
Hello, Matt.
You don't want rings, that's why.
Rings. That's right. I'm always telling Ali that no, my coaster.